I've talked in other videos about what to expect in your first year, but what is the breakdown of a typical law school career? How do things proceed from semester to semester? What are the various stages of your career that you should be aware of before you graduate? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about those, and I'm especially going to highlight a process called the on-campus interview process because it's a very important part of your law school experience. And I'm also going to show you about all the things that are riding on that experience. Now, in other videos, I'm going to talk about how you can apply for a variety of jobs. So some of what I'm going to talk about today in this video is really just a highlight. So I encourage you, if you're interested in specific kinds of legal employment, to watch those other videos, and I will give you some tips that you can think about during law school to maximize your chances. I also have a series of videos where I will be talking to individual attorneys who are working in those careers, and they have some insights to offer you as well as to how you can be successful in law school to position yourself for those careers. So this video is more just an overview of how the law school process works and to just kind of tee up some important pieces for you to think about. So the little graph that I've made here illustrates how the typical law school semesters work and how the summers that you have in between your years will be most likely utilized. So the most important thing that I want to emphasize about this graph is there may be differences based on your own unique experience. There's nothing about this chart that you should take as set in stone. It's not like everybody has to follow this process, and there's lots of flexibility as to how you go through your law school career. Also, additionally, individual law schools will do things somewhat differently, and depending on the time period that you're living in, there might even be changes to this process. But for the most part, this is what you will typically notice. And these are some of my recommendations as to how you utilize these time periods. In my 1L video, I talk about what your summer before your 1L experience should be, so you can look to that video for more details. But as I said in that video, you are really doing a few things in your summer before you go to law school. You're putting your seat deposit down and you're accepting the admissions offer. You're also getting your schedule at some point in August before your first semester begins. And that schedule will be predetermined for you because the curriculum is all standardized in the first year. Something else that I talk about in the 1L video. And then you're also getting settled. You're moving to the location if it's a place that you're not living in currently. You're finding housing. You're getting connected with roommates. You're putting seat deposits or you're putting deposits down on places that you're leasing, and you're basically getting acclimated to a new way of life. The other thing that I'm emphasizing and that I emphasized in the 1L video, and which I need to remind you again here, is that summer before you go to law school really needs to be a restful summer. If you can afford it, quit your job earlier so that you can take some time off, go on vacation with family, take a trip, clear your mind, go sit on the beach for 2 weeks and do nothing, because the next 3 years of your life are going to be very intense. And it may be your last opportunity for a few years to take a really well-earned rest. So when 1L begins, as I talked in my 1L video, most of your time is spent in classes. That's the vast majority of the thing that you're going to be doing. You're not working on extracurriculars. Your hobbies are really just there for your mental health. Classes are your primary mode of work, followed by the exams. And I talked a little about that in my 1L video. Additionally, during the 1L experience, you're going to apply for a few things if you're interested in doing so. In the 1L year, usually in the spring semester, you can apply for journals, and many people try to get onto what is called Law Review. Law Review is the journal, the leading journal in your law school. Every law school has at least one law review in it, and the law for review that is named after your school. So, for instance, the law school I was at, the George Washington University Law Review, that's the banner law review, and it's the one that it's the most prestigious for your school. And depending on what school you go to, it can even be more prestigious in the nation. Everybody applies for that in some respect, and you can be considered no matter what. The choosing of being on law review is based around your first semester grades. It's also based around an application process, personal statement. There's a lot of factors that might go into that. There are also other law reviews that will be considering you as well. You can apply for a range of other specialty law reviews. It's like, for example, I was on the law review that is the George Washington University International Law Review. I wasn't on the Banner Law Review, but I was on a different journal. And that gives you an opportunity to be able to participate in the law review experience. There's lots of information online as to whether or not you should or should not be on law review and what it is like. I will talk in another video about what being on a law review can actually mean for you in terms of your career. But law reviews are considered to be a thing that really boosts your resume. So a lot of high-paying jobs and a lot of clerkships really value people who are members of their Banner Law Review. Now, just because you didn't get on the law review, that doesn't mean your career is over. I can actually attest to that personally. I didn't make my law review, but I ended up securing a summer associateship, and I did just fine in terms of my placement. In fact, many of the people that I knew who were on law review didn't get some of those positions. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get there. It's just one less possible thing to serve on your resume. You can also start applying for some clubs too, like moot court and mock trial. Being on moot court is also a competitive process, and moot court is again seen by a lot of clerkships, clerkship applications by a lot of judges as being a very useful thing to do. It helps you in terms of preparing for how courts work. It teaches you oral argument and oral advocacy, and once again, it's a line item on your resume. Once again, if you don't do those clubs, it's not the end of the world. It's not like it's going to terminate your career, but it is something to strive for, and they are competitive. It's one of those things that adds to your prestige. Another thing you're doing in that spring of your 1L year, towards the middle part of the spring, is you're applying for internships for your coming summer. Most people who do law school don't end up taking like a paid gig during that first year, although you definitely can. Your summertime is basically yours to do with it what you want, although very many people look for experiences. It's a good opportunity to start networking, and many applications for recent 1Ls, recent people that are leaving 1L, are available during the spring year. You can work for agencies that might be in your location. You could work for local or private firms. You can also potentially work with nonprofits over the summer. All those are ways that you can beef up your resume, show that you have some experience, and probably for the first time in your life, actually get some hands-on training in a legal field. So I would see those internships more as a learning experience than necessarily something that's going to lock you in for your career. That said, if you play it right, you might be able to network yourself into a position that may be long-term. Maybe they like you enough that they might bring you back full-time when you're actually graduated. So those are some of the things you're doing during your 1L year besides just taking classes and exams. Then during the summer, you're hopefully interning somewhere. You're doing some real experience, even if it's totally voluntary. It's a good opportunity to develop some skills. You're also going to be resting, of course, during your summer, but one really major thing that you're going to be doing is preparing for what's called OCI, or on-campus interviews. Let me stop here and tell you a little bit about what OCI is. OCI is essentially when law firms will come onto campus, so that's where the on-campus part comes in, and they will interview candidates for their positions for what are called summer associates. On-campus interviews are a huge competitive experience where many firms from around the nation will be coming to your school to interview and select a person. When I talk about working for the big firms, I will talk a little bit more about what OCI means, because OCI oftentimes is for the biggest firms in the nation. That doesn't necessarily mean other firms aren't doing it, but some of the lessons you can learn from applying for the really big firms for quote-unquote big law, those lessons can be very useful for you. I'll talk more about that individually when I talk about big law. But OCI, essentially, what you're doing is you're preparing to be interviewed for the possibility of doing something in the following summer. And the way in which it works is you will fill out a bunch of applications, you will put in resumes, you'll send out letters of recommendation requests, and you'll basically build a packet, a portfolio, that you will then upload to a system that allows your school to have your resume and all of your packets available through the school's database, at which point then employers can access that database and take a look at who they want to hire. That means that there could be a lot of people from your same school applying for one position, And that probably also means that other places in the country are also applying for those positions. As I mentioned in the video that I'm going to do about big law, many places, many big law firms will actually choose a school and choose the number of people they will accept from that school for a position. Usually this is based on alumni that are working for that firm. So for example, it may be a firm that is potentially willing to hire 10 people from Harvard, but only maybe 2 people from George Washington University or from a similarly placed school. This is all based around rankings, which is something I'll talk more about when we look at big law. But the key with the OCI process is that you're preparing to do that over the summer. And what you're doing is you're gathering up all of your information, you're putting it in that database, and you're getting yourself ready for the experience. Then when your second year begins, usually in that late summer, early fall is when on-campus interviews start. And you'll probably, if it's anything like I experienced, firms will secure a location close to the school, either on the school's property, in the building, or in a hotel nearby, or some conference room nearby, and they will start sending out interviews. They will send you out requests to say, we'd like to interview you and screen you for this position. And that first blush, that first opportunity is to interview and show that you're ready to do this. It can be kind of a meat market. Sometimes, for instance, when you're at a location, the hotel will be booked an entire floor, and firms will actually book a room next door to other firms. So quite literally, you can walk around a hallway and see signs for each individual firm as they're interviewing someone. For the most part, they will send out a representative from their firm that's probably connected to your school, like an alumni, and that person will do the interviewing. And they're essentially screening you out of the pool of candidates that they've looked at to decide whether or not they want to pursue you as a potential candidate. That OCI process is largely based around how you have applied in the database itself. So they will look at your GPA, they will look at your background materials, and then they will weed out the people they don't want to interview, and then they will interview maybe a couple dozen or so that they do want to potentially consider from your school. And through that application and interview process, they will then settle down on maybe 2 or 3 individuals that they're actually considering. Then that on-campus interview process will continue. Hopefully after a couple weeks, you'll hear back from them for what's called a callback interview. And that interview will be a full day experience on their at the firm in which they are looking at your background and considering whether they want to hire you. Once again, I'll talk more about that when I talk about big law and some of the details about how that process works. But all of that's going to be taking place in the first month or so of your 2L year. Additionally, if you applied for any of those journals and clubs, you've been accepted at some point in the summer, probably before the 1L semester, spring semester ends. And now in your 2L year, you're joining those clubs, you're joining the journal, and you're getting acclimated to the duties that you're performing within those clubs. Then, of course, you're continuing in your classes, and you're aiming to get good grades, and then you're taking exams or doing any written work that might be required of you in those elective years. And then you're also potentially doing other things like applying for other jobs, looking at other experiences that you might have during the year, interning throughout the year itself, potentially even getting paid for the work that you're doing. All of that are things that you could potentially do during your second year. Many people describe 1L as a very stressful and time-consuming and hard experience, but they describe that first semester of 2L as being the most chaotic because there's just so much going on all at once. And if you've applied at a lot of different places for a lot of different opportunities, you could be very much overwhelmed and still having to balance good classes. The really key important piece that I want to emphasize about the on-campus interviews is that when your on-campus interviews are being conducted, the big thing they're looking at are these grades from your first year. These grades are what are helping the firms decide whether or not they even want to interview you in the first place. And your grades absolutely will be used as a way to winnow you out. Now you might say after watching my 1L video, but wait a minute, how could that be possible? All of my ability in a class is being determined around a single test that it took me 3 hours to answer. And potentially the professor may or may not have taken it seriously, and I've got this forced curve that's been placed on me, and there's a very high possibility that I will end up with a B or a B plus. You mean to tell me that that's what's going to determine whether or not I get an on-campus interview? The answer is yes. That's exactly what's going to be used to determine it. So you can think about how ranking of your law school and the grades that you get are factoring into all this, and you can see how going to a much more highly ranked school means that a lower GPA potentially could get you a job, whereas a lower ranked school, you have to really break into that top part of the class and get the very best grades possible in a very tough competitive experience. So oftentimes OCI is very unsuccessful for people. And not every law student is going to walk away from a job from this and an offer. The offer that you're aiming toward, of course, is to be able to come and be a summer associate at the firm or wherever it is that you're applying to. And I will talk in my video about Big Law as to what a summer associate gig actually looks like. Now, the thing that you're doing over that second year summer is potentially either working for the summer associate position, if you got one on OCI, or you're working at some other job. Maybe you're going back to your internship. Maybe you weren't successful during OCI. Maybe you were one of the 75% of people in your class that just did not even get an interview. In which case, the second year summer is your opportunity to try again, to make more connections with people, to intern at other places that maybe you couldn't get into the last time. Maybe your grades have improved significantly from what they were that first year, and now you can apply to positions that would have not normally been open to you during your 1L year, and now you can go back and try them again. At every stage, of course, you have the opportunity to continue to show that you're improving, and your grades are the reflection of that. These other jobs could include things like working for a department that's in the federal government, volunteering with a very important nonprofit, working with a family member or a private firm that you know or a solo practitioner that you could work and make connections with, doing some real actual practice underneath the supervision of that other attorney. So all those things are possibilities that are not necessarily just summer associate gigs. Your 2L year, as I say, is really a networking opportunity. Here's where you're really trying to build your possibilities for the coming year, because the more you do over this year, the more likely it's going to have an impact on the following year. Then by the time you get to your last year, classes kind of take a back seat. You're looking more and more at taking classes that are just kind of filling in the gaps of your education. You're taking things like clinics. You're working with groups that are actually doing specific kinds of law. You're practicing your writing skills. Think of 3L as an opportunity to kind of put some frosting on the cake that you've been baking for the last 2 years. It's not as crucial to get the perfect grades in the 3L year unless you still haven't got something lined up for a career. The other thing you're applying for are federal clerkships if you're interested in those. Those usually come up during this particular year, and that's when you can start considering whether or not you want to be placed in those positions. There's also clerkships that could potentially be open in your 2L year as well. A lot of prestigious federal clerkships can be open during that time period. Then you're also applying for job applications. Anything that you didn't get secured over the previous summer, that's your opportunity to do it. The benefits of a summer associate position, and I'll talk about this in the Big Law video, is that if you've done well over that summer, and if you have been proven that you're a worthy employee and you're a good team player, then usually at the end of that summer associate position, right at the start of your third year, you will get a letter saying, we would like to extend an official offer for you to join us as an associate in our firm. And that's an offer of employment for when you are graduated. What's nice about that offer is then it basically frees up your mind. That whole entire 3L experience is basically just, what do I need to do in order to pass the bar? Grades no longer matter. Your ability to do any kind of specific kind of work no longer really matters. And it's really just at that point looking forward to the time period when you're going to be working. But let's say you didn't get the summer associate position, or let's say they didn't give you the firm offer. That's what your 3L year is for, is to start looking for other job applications that you could potentially apply for. I will say, too, that if you don't get the summer associate position, oftentimes many of the jobs that you would want to be applying for probably won't look at you until the following fall because, and this leads me to the last part, because during the summer you're doing one very important thing, and that is you're studying for the bar and then you're taking the bar. And those two things are probably the most crucial part of your summer. It's really crucial to be able to pass the bar because it will open up so many avenues and windows for you when you start applying for other jobs. And in fact, many places will not even look at you until you have passed the bar and you become a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. And then suddenly you'll have more opportunity to apply to things. I'll talk more about the bar in a specific video to give you an idea about what the bar is actually like. What I think you'll find in my video is actually the bar is not as strenuous as some people make it out to be, especially after you've experienced all of what law school can throw at you. 2 days of taking a test can be certainly stressful and anxiety producing, but the bar honestly is not as hard as people make it out to seem. And that summer is a great opportunity to get prepared for that. If you got a summer associate position and they gave you that firm offer, sometimes the firms will even pay for you to go through a bar prep course that will then prepare you for passing the bar because they are taking a risk on hiring you. Then the other big thing is, of course, you want to take a break. That last summer is really when you get some breathing room, especially if you've done well over your law school experience. This is the time period to basically bask in the achievements that you've made, or to prepare yourself to pass the bar so that you can make some more achievements. In terms of grades, the best way to think about it is, as I say, the first year, everything's riding on those grades. Those grades are what get you into the OCI experience. They're what get you the summer associate position, and based on the summer associate, you get that firm placement. So everything is really riding on that first year. I cannot stress enough, and I did stress this in the 1L video, that you really need to make that year as productive as possible. But then your 2L year gets maybe a little less important. Obviously, it's more important if you are still looking for a position. But if you got a summer associate position, then the grades are maybe not as much as they mattered before. But you still want to try to make up for any lost time that you missed in that 1L experience. And then in 3L, by the time you get to your third year, the grades have really stopped mattering a lot because most of the classes you've taken at this point are going to give you everything you need to know to pass the bar. This is really just about gaining skills as opposed to worrying about what your grades are going to look like. In fact, a lot of classes that you take in your 3L year are really based around activities and papers that you might write rather than taking exams. So all of that is to say that at each stage there's different burdens and different incentives for you to improve and to maximize your potential. I'll talk in each of the videos about the kinds of careers that you can seek out throughout your law school experience, but I hope at least this roadmap of what law school is like was somewhat helpful for you. Good luck.